What would you do if your mother-in-law called you lazy to the whole family, but smiled sweetly to your face? In today's Just Normal podcast, we dive into one woman's classy clapback at a narcissistic mother-in-law, a bold move that turned a quiet dinner into a true revenge story. Let's take it back to where it all started. Our storyteller, a 25-year-old woman, married just a year into a 5-year relationship, had been quietly juggling two very real things: finishing her degree and working part-time from home. Not an easy combination by any stretch, especially when you're trying to build a future and contribute in ways that don't always show up on a traditional paycheck. But of course, there's always someone in the family who sees things differently. Enter the toxic mother-in-law. You know the type. Smiles in your face, but throws darts behind your back. To our storyteller, she was all sugar and fake sympathy. Oh, sweetheart, must be so tiring studying and working at the same time. Good for you. But to the rest of the extended family, she was painting a whole different picture. And not just gossip. We're talking classic toxic family Reddit material, telling everyone her daughter-in-law was too lazy to get a real job, mooching off her son, and too modern to be a real wife. Now let's pause here, because this is where it gets personal for a lot of people. If you've ever dealt with a narcissistic mother-in-law, or been the target of subtle character assassination within your own family, you know the emotional toll it takes. It's not just the words, it's the gaslighting, the passive-aggressive tone, the way your character is slowly chipped away in rooms you're not even invited into. And in this case, our storyteller would have never known if it weren't for her sister-in-law, who quietly pulled her aside one day and said, "Hey, just so you know, your MIL's been saying some things at the family dinners you've been missing." That moment, that's when it shifted. She could have ignored it. She could have brushed it off as just family politics. But instead, and this is where the story begins to turn, she decided to show up. Now I want you to think about that. What would you do if someone you trusted, or someone you have to live with through marriage, was slowly poisoning how the rest of the family sees you? Would you confront them head on? Would you wait it out, hoping their lies eventually unravel? Or would you do what this woman did and come prepared, with proof? Because this isn't just a wife versus mother-in-law story. It's not just husband-mom drama. It's a modern take on how women, especially younger wives, are often dismissed, undermined, or quietly judged for not fitting the mold of what some families expect. And in the next part of this relationship drama podcast, we'll talk about exactly what she brought to that dinner and how one calm moment of truth-telling flipped the whole dynamic. But for now, I'll leave you with this. When someone keeps tearing you down behind your back, do you speak up or stay silent to keep the peace? And more importantly, who really benefits when you stay quiet? Let me ask you this. If you had one chance to set the record straight in front of the very people who've been silently judging you, would you take it? That's exactly what our storyteller did. The next Sunday dinner, she didn't come in ready for a fight. No raised voice, no dramatic accusations. She came in dressed like she meant business, professional, composed, and carrying a neat little folder. And inside, every single piece of proof her toxic mother-in-law claimed didn't exist. We're talking pay stubs from her remote job, a class schedule that showed she was putting in more hours than most full-time students, a scholarship letter proving not only was she working, but excelling, and to top it off, a freelance design portfolio showing her real work. Now, if you've ever listened to crazy mill stories or scrolled through Reddit stories, mother-in-law, you'll know, this kind of calm confrontation is rare. Most relationship drama podcasts center around the blow-ups, the screaming matches. But this was precision, like truth served on a silver platter. So here's what happened. Dinner was halfway through when her narcissistic mill made another joke. You know the kind. Passive-aggressive, just loud enough for everyone to hear, but light enough to deny. Well, not all of us have the luxury of lounging at home all day like OP. And instead of laughing it off like she used to, Our storyteller calmly pulled out her folder. No drama, no sarcasm, just this. Actually, since there's been some confusion, I thought I'd clarify what I do all day. Dead. Silence. She laid the documents out on the table, one by one, while the rest of the family looked on in stunned silence. She wasn't defensive, she wasn't rude, she simply stated facts. Then she looked her mother-in-law in the eye and said, I work, I study, I contribute. What I don't do is lie about family to feel superior. That line, Hugh, that's not just a comeback, that's a full reset of the family dynamic. Her mill, caught completely off guard, tried to backtrack. It was just a joke. You're being too sensitive. But her husband, and this part matters, finally stood up for her. If my wife's success makes you uncomfortable, that's your problem, not hers. And just like that, the room shifted. You see, toxic family Reddit stories don't always end with big explosions. Sometimes, they end with a woman calmly reclaiming her narrative, and a man finally drawing a boundary. So here's the real question. Is it petty to come with proof? Or is it powerful to calmly expose a lie in front of people who believed it? And deeper, in the next part, we'll look at the fallout, how the family dynamic changed, how the MIL's status crumbled, and how quiet strength can sometimes speak louder than confrontation. Let me ask you something that might hit close to home. What happens when the person who's always controlled the narrative suddenly loses control? Because after that Sunday dinner, after the receipts, the silence, and the husband finally speaking up, things didn't go back to normal, not even close. This mother-in-law, who once sat at the center of every family gathering, who whispered gossip with a smile and ran the show like a narcissistic mother-in-law queen bee, well, she didn't quite know what to do when the spotlight turned on her. And here's the twist that many people in toxic mother-in-law situations might relate to. The damage wasn't just done to her credibility, it was done to her image. After the confrontation, she stopped being the confident hostess. She became quiet, reserved, and let's be honest, a little embarrassed. Instead of jokes and judgment, she started showing up with nothing but a salad and a forced smile. It's subtle, but it's powerful. You see, this wasn't just about one lie. It was about a pattern of manipulation. A pattern many of us recognize from toxic family Reddit threads and Just No MIL podcast episodes. These aren't just difficult in-laws, they're people who create chaos to maintain control. But here's the fascinating part. When that control was taken away, without yelling, without drama, the rest of the family started to wake up. Cousins who used to laugh along, now they whisper. Aunts who used to take her side, now they ask questions. And her once loyal supporters, quiet. This wasn't a revenge fantasy. It was a true revenge story in the most unexpected form. Calm, factual, and public. No screaming, just exposure. And maybe that's the most effective way to handle wife versus mother-in-law stories like this. Not with a fight, but with clarity. Now, I want to pause here and reflect on something. Many of us were raised to believe that keeping family peace means staying quiet, letting things go, not rocking the boat. But peace without truth isn't really peace. It's performance. And sometimes it takes one person to say, enough, to reset generations of silence. So, where does that leave us? Well, this woman didn't just stand up for herself. She shifted an entire family dynamic. The once lazy daughter-in-law became the truth-teller, and the once powerful MIL, she became just another guest at the table. So I'll leave you with this question. When the lies finally fall apart and the family sees the truth, do they change how they treat the liar or just how they talk about them? Let me ask you something, and think about this honestly. When someone toxic finally loses power, should we forgive, forget, or stay cautious? Because here's what happened next in this crazy Mill story, and it's something you don't often hear in a relationship drama podcast. After that dinner, the silence from the mother-in-law wasn't just awkward, it was strategic. She didn't apologize. She didn't own her behavior. She just stopped. Stopped making jokes. Stopped attending as often. stopped talking about the daughter-in-law altogether. Now, some would say that's progress. Others might say it's just damage control. And I think that's where it gets complicated, especially in these toxic family Reddit types of situations, where one moment of exposure doesn't necessarily change the heart. It just changes the behavior, temporarily. The daughter-in-law, let's call her Jane for simplicity, was left in a strange emotional space. She wasn't being attacked anymore, but she wasn't being accepted either. It was like she had won the battle, but lost something else. The illusion that this relationship could ever be normal. And that's what we don't always talk about in these Just Normal podcast stories. What comes after the blow-up? The emotional fallout? The questions like, should I feel guilty that I embarrassed her? Am I petty for not wanting to rebuild the bridge? What if my husband starts feeling torn again? Because here's the truth. Sometimes standing up for yourself doesn't lead to healing. It leads to distance, to polite avoidance, to that fake smile energy we've all seen at holiday dinners. That's the hidden cost of speaking out in toxic mother-in-law dynamics. You might earn your peace, but you'll also feel the gap, and no one prepares you for that. But here's where I offer a gentle counterpoint. Because I know some of you listening may be thinking, well, maybe Jane should try to make peace now. Maybe now that MIL's quiet, they can start fresh. Maybe. But here's what I'd say. Silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's just a quieter form of control. And if the only reason someone stops mistreating you is because you caught them, not because they understand, then what exactly are you rebuilding? That's the twist in many wife versus mother-in-law stories. The victory isn't in changing them. It's in choosing what kind of future you'll accept for yourself. So now I'll ask you, if someone toxic stops attacking you, but never owns their damage, do you let them back in? Or do you protect your peace and keep the door closed, even if it stays awkward forever? Let me wrap this up with a question that might sound simple, but hits deep. What does closure really look like, especially in a toxic family? Because here's how Jane's story ends, and why it's one of those true revenge stories that doesn't rely on yelling, slamming doors, or cutting people off forever. It's subtle, quiet, but powerful. After that family dinner, Jane didn't block her narcissistic mother-in-law. She didn't go on a rant. She didn't try to convince every cousin and aunt what really happened. She just kept living, working, studying, showing up with confidence. And every time Emile threw a tiny jab or a passive comment, Jane didn't flinch. She responded with a smile or silence, and honestly, that was more unsettling to Emile than anything else, because when someone toxic can't rattle you anymore, they lose their grip. This is something I see over and over again in Reddit stories, mother-in-law, and toxic family Reddit threads. Sometimes the most powerful revenge is peace. Not pretending everything is okay, not faking a bond that isn't real, but being unbothered, firm, calm. Jane and her husband, who, by the way, continued to support her without wavering, created their own little space in that family. They showed up to events, kept things respectful, but stopped chasing approval. And over time, the rest of the family noticed. The whispers shifted. The cousins who used to laugh along with MIL's comments, now they quietly pulled Jane aside to say, "Hey, I didn't know all that, I'm sorry." Some of them even started sharing their own husband-mom drama stories. And suddenly, Jane wasn't the odd one out. She was the brave one. That's why this story fits so perfectly in a relationship drama podcast or a Just Nomil podcast, because it's not just about conflict. It's about reclaiming your place with dignity. And if you're listening to this right now thinking, this sounds like my situation, I want you to hear this. You don't need to scream to be strong. You don't need to cut ties to protect your heart. Sometimes you just need to stop engaging and start living. Now, here's where you come in. Drop a simple comment below with one of these. This is me. I've been there. Or, Team Jane. That's it. No overthinking, no long paragraphs. Just a simple way to say, yeah, I get it. Because when we share even a few words, we build a space where others feel seen too. And if you've got your own crazy MIL stories or wife versus mother-in-law stories, I'd love to hear them. Send them in. Let's turn more silence into strength. Because at the end of the day, respect is the real closure.